Man or bear? It's a question that has sparked a viral meme that has led to a global conversation. And if you haven't heard of man or bear yet, it goes like this. If you were alone in the woods, would you rather encounter a bear or a man? The man or bear is a hypothetical question that's actually a Trojan horse. Because hidden inside this question, man or bear, are the disturbing and complicated feelings people have, especially women people, around an overall fear of men. That with bears, you know what you're getting. They're wild animals with intentions that are pure and instinctual. When they see us, we're food or a threat. But a strange man, all alone, in the woods? That's not a wild animal following its instincts. That's a calculating predator, potentially following a dark and sadistic drive that's wholly unnatural. And most of us would rather be bear food than the trophy of some serial sicko. Now, there are some very serious and important conversations about what that all means. And the most important takeaway I understand is that that question is not about the bear. My first thought, or maybe second thought, and the starting point for this episode, was about the bear. I wouldn't want this bear to get killed. There are only so many bears left in the world. It would make more sense if I was killed for the bear to survive, rather than the bear being killed, right? Which reveals, I think, another less discussed side of true crime. And I only have anecdotal evidence of this, but that true crime people are also animal people. And there's a connection between our interest in true crime and our compassion and profound desire to protect the vulnerable and innocent. And animals represent that innocence and vulnerability. But what happens when we take it too far and we cross a boundary that never should be crossed? So the conversation happening everywhere else is clear that it's not about the bear. But here at Dead Sleep, for this episode, it's all about the bear. And the question, man or bear, is about what happened when a strange man and a wild bear encountered each other in Alaska one day in 2003. It's a story that starts as a bedtime classic, a real-life Goldilocks tale of a human who ventures into the forest to make a home for himself among the bears. Only in real life, his story ends as a mystery. When the remains of not one, but two human bodies are discovered in the Alaskan forest. What actually happened in that forest, and who or what was behind these deaths? We'll find out all about it in tonight's episode of Dead Sleep True Crime for Bedtime, and a True Crime for Bedtime version of the brilliant and unforgettable 2005 documentary by Werner Herzog called Grizzly Man. I'm Nancy Miller, and this is Dead Sleep True Crime for Bedtime. And before we get started tonight, I have a hypothetical would you rather scenario for you. You're in bed, alone. The lights are off. You're listening to your favorite niche true crime podcast. And just as you're about to fall asleep, would you rather encounter a subscription or an ad? Neither one is ideal. Ideally, we'd be able to enjoy everything we loved forever and for free. But if you were in a situation where you cared about a podcast and your own sanity, and you were forced to choose between an ad or a subscription, well, I'd argue an ad is like a serial predator. You have no idea when it's coming or what to expect. You have no idea how many ads are going to invade your peaceful rest, and the ad is louder than a Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Mixed at 10 times the real volume of the show, it feels unsettling because you don't know when the next ad is coming or how many ads are out to get you. You just know you want to get out of there. Now there's the subscription scenario. And at least with a subscription, you know what you'd be getting. For $5 a month, you get an engaging weekly true crime story you can fall asleep to with a bonus episode every month. I'm not here to pressure anyone into spending any money that they don't have. But if you find that this show does two things, that it tells you a good true crime story and helps you fall asleep, I'd be honored if you found that worthy of your time and your investment. That's all. And with that, let's settle into bed for real. Let's get cozy under those covers like we're a bear getting into the den for hibernation. We're going to close our eyes and get ready to fall dead asleep with Dead Sleep True Crime for Bedtime. And the strange, chilling, and unforgettable saga of the Grizzly Man. That little sound you hear, that's the sound of baby bears. They look as cute as they sound. Bear cubs, when they're born, are very small, weighing only around a pound. Bear cubs are a lot like human babies. When they're born, they're altricial. Altricial means helpless. So when they're born, they need help for all kinds of things. They can't walk yet. They can't feed themselves, just like human babies. Animals that are self-sufficient and capable of taking care of themselves when they're born are called precocial. That includes animals like ducks and chickens. Bear cubs are so tiny and so helpless when they're born, it's hard to imagine. In a few years, these very bears, the ones you can hear right now, will one day grow up to be brown bears, also known as grizzly bears. Ones that can weigh anywhere from 600 to 1,200 pounds, and when standing on its two hind legs, can tower over us at 9 feet tall. That's around 2.7 meters for our friends outside of the United States. And one day, those little baby bear cub cries will become growls. Growls so low, so deep, and so resonant, you can feel them in your chest. And the bears that live in the remote wilderness of the Alaskan Peninsula, they learn very early how to take care of themselves, foraging for food, hunting for fish in a fast-moving river. And just to ease your mind, this is a story about wild animals, but there are no stories around animal abuse in this saga. Back in 2003, there was no man who claimed a stronger connection to the brown bears, the grizzly bears of the Alaskan Peninsula, than a man named Timothy Treadwell. And beginning in 1990, Timothy Treadwell spent 13 summers visiting and protecting, being the guardian of a group of bears, of the grizzly bears of Alaska. Which was why it was so strange. At the end of the summer, in 2003, when the pilot who typically dropped Timothy off in the beginning of the summer and then picked him up again at the end of the season, in the fall. He was nowhere to be found. His usual camping spot? Deserted. The woman he was traveling with, a girlfriend named Amy, was also gone. Timothy had complained for years about poachers and other humans who were out to get him. This pilot knew Timothy would do anything to save those bears. So where was Tim? Somewhere in the forest was the answer. A tragedy hidden somewhere in the thicket of trees. An area of woods called the Grizzly Maze. And as the pilot circled the area, he saw something. An area full of blood and mess and bodies that looked like a crime scene. He had no idea what had happened just yet, but he did know one thing. Whatever had happened, it was really, really bad. It did not look like the work of Mother Nature. It looked like cold-blooded murder. In the 80 years of recorded history in that park, there had never been a human death caused by a wild brown bear. So what happened? We first have to know more about the victim. Or was he the perpetrator? Timothy Treadwell. There were many stories about Timothy Treadwell and who he really was. Some saw a passionate animal activist bringing attention to the plight of grizzly bears. Others, a clueless goofball who did more harm than good. And others, his detractors, saw a con man with a dark side who used animals to seize the spotlight. Whoever he really was, there was one thing everyone could agree on. He was obsessed with bears. The director and actor Werner Herzog has made a career out of making documentaries about obsessed and eccentric people. Now in his 80s, he's told countless stories about people and their quests. From working with dangerously egomaniacal stars like the actor Klaus Kinski, to following a pair of French scientists who risked their lives to film active volcanoes. And yet, in 2003, when he heard about Timothy Treadwell, he hadn't encountered anyone quite like him. A man who captured hundreds of hours of footage of wild grizzly bears. A human who had gotten so close to a wild grizzly bear, he could tap them on the nose. He could smell their breath and survived. And not only survived, over time, he became so close to these bears, he saw them like his friends. Like maybe he could belong among them. Like Mowgli, the man cub in the Jungle Book, and his bear best friend, Blue. Native Alaskan communities would be the first to caution. Wild bears aren't our friends. And to breach that animal-human boundary was disrespectful to the bear and dangerous to the human. Timothy Treadwell wasn't a native Alaskan. Not even close. He grew up a world away in suburban Long Island. He loved animals. As a kid, his best friend was a pet squirrel named Willie. He wasn't a trained environmentalist or animal biologist. He was an aspiring actor who moved to LA in the 80s. Some of his LA friends called him Timmy, which fit the man with the bleach blonde bowl cut and childlike spirit. A man who saw himself as Prince Valiant, out to save a threatened species. That is, after her first dream of being a famous actor in Hollywood went extinct. Throughout his adult life, Timothy struggled with mental health issues. He cycled through various mood stabilizers, but nothing really stuck. He told his close friend and former girlfriend, Jewel Palovak. He said he didn't like the middle ground that drugs gave him. He said he needed those highs and lows. "It's my personality," he told her. Anyone who watches Grizzly Man and sees Timothy on screen, his expansive gesturing, his mood swings, his mania, paranoia, and eventual delusions, can see there's something up there. An armchair psychologist might suggest bipolar disorder, narcissistic personality disorder, histrionic personality disorder, and that's all speculative. One fact about Timmy that says a lot about how he approached life. In high school and college, he was an excellent athlete and competitive diver. Timothy went to college on a diving scholarship. And elite competitive divers are known for their mental toughness, of their ability to handle pressure, to embrace risk. It's a solo sport, one that's not about a team, but about one's own performance. A performance that involves precision and control, a sense of me against the world. And with that comes an unshakable self-confidence that anything is possible. That is, if you're brave enough to take the leap. With Timothy Treadwell, there was bravery, and there was recklessness, because he had an unhinged side. After dropping out of college due to a back injury and losing his diving scholarship, he got mixed up in alcohol and drugs, which meant he got mixed up with bad people, people with guns, his friend Jewel said, which led to his dark side. When he lived in LA, they used to go to a local courthouse to watch people being sentenced. He did it to remind himself that if he went to that dark place, this is what might happen to him. He'd end up in a cage. Instead, he fell into a different trap of drug addiction, and then he died. For a brief moment, anyway, after injecting himself with some nearly lethal cocktail of illegal drugs and ODing. When Timothy came back to life, he was reborn, which included a new plan to venture up to Alaska. He'd heard about the bears from someone and was desperate to see them in person. With this new plan also came a new identity. He wasn't some failed ex-jock and ex-junkie from Long Island with a real name of Tim Dexter. He was an explorer, an animal activist from the outback in Australia, named Timothy Treadwell. His accent, of course, was bogus. Friends said he sometimes sounded Australian. Other people said he sounded Cockney, or like a long-lost relative of the Kennedys. But his passion for animals was true, and pure, and painful. In the hours and hours of self-filmed videos, he's sometimes in tears as he describes how much he loves animals and how effed over animals are, and how much that sucks. And this is, as it was then, largely true. Animals, especially the ones who need us to give them land to roam, are often effed over. But in the case of the grizzly bears in this particular park in Alaska, they weren't in any kind of trouble. And they were healthy, and they were safe, and they lived in a world of abundance. The streams and rivers were filled with fresh salmon. And it was that safety and abundance that actually caused Timothy Treadwell so much trouble. For 12 summers, Timothy lived safely, often rapturously, among the bears. He played near them, he occasionally touched them, and over time, he felt like he got to know them, and even named them. Each bear had a moniker, and Timothy had his favorites. There was the big and affable bear named Mr. Chocolate. There was a young subadult male bear named Rowdy, who was very rowdy. There was a lovelorn bachelor bear named Mickey, who vied for the attention of a cool girl bear named Saturn. Looking back on it now, what he was doing reminded me of Meerkat Manor, the Animal Planet show that debuted the same year Grizzly Man did as a documentary. The difference between Meerkat Manor and Timothy's footage is that Timothy made himself, not the bears, the star of the show. Which, if this were a murder mystery, offers a motive. Because like the star of any show, maybe Timothy didn't notice that his co-stars found him annoying. And maybe he eventually became so annoying, they decided they wanted him gone. Which would make these bears like Agatha Christie characters. Out of all of the bears that he knew for 12 years, which one finally snapped and killed him? Was it the so-called nice guy, Mr. Chocolate? The rambunctious young bear, Rowdy? Or maybe, more likely, Timothy wasn't even a consideration. What he saw as kinship was blank indifference. Because he wasn't one of the bears. He was what you might call a mushroom. In the late 1970s, in American gang culture, mushroom was a term used to describe random bystanders who were the unwitting victims of circumstances that they got caught up in by mistake. A mushroom describes a human presence that's largely invisible to the main players. They are not meant to be part of the action. They just got caught up in the crossfire. The wrong place at the wrong time. Where Timothy was with these bears and his love for them, they saw whatever the bear equivalent was to a mushroom. He was invisible in their landscape until that landscape changed. Those past few years, in the early 2000s, that area of Alaska had suffered from drought. And what's more, by the fall of 2003, the abundance of salmon that these bears were used to, that supply had dried up. Grizzly bears need around 30 pounds of food per day to store up enough fat for the winter. In that particular year, 2003, it appears that amount of food was hard to find. Bears ate whatever they could find, including eating their own. Timothy was aware of this and tried to help the bears by creating a makeshift salmon run out of rocks along a riverbed. He had no idea what he was doing, and it didn't do anything. But he felt like he was helping. He'd never seen the area this barren of resources, and Timothy grew depressed by what was happening, but he didn't feel afraid. The person who did feel afraid was his partner of 3 years, a woman named Amy Hudegard. She was not as passionate about bears. In fact, she was afraid of the bears. But she agreed, as Timothy's girlfriend, to help him shoot that summer, including the footage captured on the last day of her and Tim's lives. It was early October 2003, and Timothy and Amy, they were supposed to be back home in California. But Tim ran into some unexpected trouble, and it wasn't started by a bear, but provoked by a human being. Timothy and Amy were at the airport. They were scheduled to fly out from Alaska to Los Angeles, but something happened with Timothy's plane ticket, and he wasn't able to board the plane. This ticket issue led to Tim having an argument with a flight attendant and, acting out of anger, his dark side, he impulsively decided, forget this. Basically, I hate people, I hate human civilization, and I'm going back to where I belong, with my real friends, my bears. Amy went back with Timothy reluctantly, and she threatened to break up with him. She said that he was hell-bent on destruction. When they returned to the wildlife preserve and park that early October, things had changed. The difference between September and October in this area of the Alaskan park was stark. When they returned to the wildlife preserve, things had changed. They had set up camp in a different place, a more wooded and less visible area of the park that made them harder for humans to see and easier for bears to stumble upon. The bears that Timothy knew, his buds, they'd already moved on, found their hibernation spot, and were tucking themselves in for the long Alaskan winter. And like closing time at a bar, the remaining bears were out there roaming, looking desperate. Some of Tim and Amy's final pieces of footage were of a bear they didn't know that well, and what Timothy knew about this bear he didn't like. This bear was old and cranky, apparently pushing 30 and not happy about it. He didn't have a cute name like Mr. Chocolate. His name wasn't really a name. As a wild animal, the animal was ID'd as a number by the Park Service, and he was bear number 141. To the untrained eye, bear number 141 looked like he was playing in the water, diving so deep into the river that the bear's feet comically popped up above the current like it was wearing slippers. But the bear wasn't having fun. He was struggling to survive, to find food this late in the season. The bear had to dive as deep as he could to find any scraps of salmon carcasses. Timothy didn't know it yet, but the bear diving deep in the water in the video, the last bear he'd ever capture on tape, a bear he didn't really like, was going to be the lead suspect in the killing of Timothy and Amy. A killing that nobody would ever see on tape. The lens cap was mercifully left on the camera lens, but the camera recorded the audio. So when they found Amy and Timothy, they couldn't see what had happened, but they could hear what went down. And I won't go into that in this podcast, but authorities who heard the tape believe that a bear, likely bear 141, had either stalked or stumbled upon the camping area and attacked Timothy while they were sleeping in the tent. Amy awoke and tried to help. And according to the medical examiner who heard the tape and examined the remains, Amy hit the bear with a frying pan that they'd used while camping to try and save Timothy's life. But it was to no avail. Both Timothy and Amy were mortally wounded by the bear in the span of an estimated 15 minutes. Ironically, I suppose, Timothy's greatest Prince Valiant moment was towards another human, not a bear. According to the medical examiner, he yelled for his girlfriend to leave the tent in an effort to convince her to save her own life. But Amy wouldn't. She stayed behind and tried to save Timothy's life. Which is the one thing in this whole man or bear debate that's a win for the humans, I guess. That humans, unlike bears, aren't utterly indifferent to the pain of others. That sometimes in times of violence and catastrophe, humans have a rare and unique instinct. That somewhere between fight or flight, there's an impulse, against all odds, to help, to try and save. even if it means self-sacrifice. And for as beautiful and majestic and magical as these wild creatures are, bears show no mercy. Humans do, or at least we can, should we choose. When Alaskan park authorities flew to the area of the park where Amy and Timothy's remains were found, the authorities claimed they were charged by 2 bears. One of the bears was the actual killer, and the other was his alleged accomplice, or at least a bear whose stomach contents contained human remains and scraps of clothing. Those bears had gotten a taste of something they were never, ever supposed to know anything about: humans. And sadly, Timothy's actions led to the deaths of those creatures. Something that Timothy would never have wanted. People have all kinds of opinions about Timothy Treadwell. But if there was one thing he did, was offer the Disney-esque fantasy a lot of us animal lovers have. A world where we can splash around with bears and become best friends with foxes. A voyeuristic glimpse into what it might be like to be part of nature, really part of nature. As well as a harsh reminder that we never will be. Not every bedtime story has a teachable moment at the end. But I do have one simple suggestion if you're heading into the woods. Bring pepper spray. Strange man or wild bear, it won't matter. It works on either. You're good. Thanks for listening to Dead Sleep and this wild little bedtime version of Grizzly Man. I'll link to the documentary and a few other key sources in the show notes that tell the complete story. I'll be back next week with another real-life mystery made for bedtime. Until then, nighty-night.